Mute my-
Okay, to the small group that we have here today, for whom I'm very happy that they've arrived. Welcome, and we'll hope that some other folks join us along the way. This, of course, is the Wizards of Ox live session, and this week we are going to be talking about reducing your oxalate if you're coming in at about the 500 milligram level. And the idea is to give folks just another example of what's really possible here. If you start to simplify things, think a little more about oxalate in terms of, I keep using the term blocks, but I almost work in like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, that kind of thing with blocks. And so what I've done here, because we're starting at 500 milligrams, so obviously you're not dealing in smaller blocks of oxalate, you're dealing in bigger blocks. But I've tried to put together some reference material that we'll make available on the Trying Low Oxalate site, which will give you some places to look for a serving size and a food that's going to have more oxalate in it. Because truly, once you're in this area of about 150 milligrams of oxalate a meal, which is going to give you 450, and then some snacks to play with if you're at the 500 level, you're really in a range where it starts to get a little bit easier, I think, because you can take bigger servings of lower oxalate things to make something have more oxalate in it. Works very well for those who have bigger appetites. If you can give them a bigger serving of something as opposed to a tiny serving of something that's giving them more oxalate. And there's some reasonable options here where we've got testing that shows food items that are in that 40, 50 milligram range, so that you can really kind of simply put together a plate. So what I've done is kind of echo what Karla did last time. What I was trying to do is really get a fairly simple approach, kind of some baseline recipes that you could make some changes based on what your snacks are or what your preferences are, but kind of a simple approach that'll allow you to eat at this 500 milligram level, and then be able to start to slowly work down from there. And this, I'm hoping, will give you some ideas about how you can do that, because we can play with side dishes, we can play with which kinds of vegetables or fruit or whatever that you're picking, or bread options, and yeah, really start to kind of get some flexibility around the way that we think about our meals. And you want to add anything to that, Karla?
Just that I love the idea of the baseline recipes, because you can, you can bulk them up to 1,000 or use them at the 100, 150, 50 low oxalate level. I mean, it's just a baseline recipe that you can plug and play. And so you're not constantly having to come up with new, all new recipes. You can have one recipe that I can use at the 1,000, 500, 250, 100. And really all I'm doing is adding or pulling different items. So it does make planning, at least, for me, it makes planning a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's great. I did try to do something this time, because we didn't have the same really high oxalate levels we were trying to hit. So I've got a couple of things in the menu where I use a very simple meat, which has no oxalate, and then show you how to get to 150 by using your other things that you're putting together in your meal. And then I've also got some baseline recipes where they've got 40, 50, sometimes milligrams of oxalate in them. And then you're not having to pick as heavy hitters in terms of your other foods on the plate. So there's a little bit here to show how it might change a little over time too. Once you're getting down to these lower oxalate levels, you might be doing more with, with foods that are very low oxalate. So you start to see, well, you can use very low oxalate foods even in these higher oxalate menus. It's just what add-ons that you have with them. So with that said, I am going to bring up my reference document and then share my screen so that we can talk about these foods that I found that I thought might be helpful if you're trying to put together your plate. And here we go. All right, so here's my little reference document. And what I was really looking for here was foods that would help you get to that 150 per meal, but also be able to give you, a snack in the right range, or maybe you'd have 2 snacks a day, depending upon how many snacks you eat or how big your meals are. And I did try to kind of overall avoid gluten and dairy because I kind of do that on principle. A lot of people can have issues with these two. So until you get to the point where maybe you tolerate dairy better, which can happen for a lot of us, really what I've tried to do here is on the whole avoid it, although there's a couple of exceptions. So when we're trying to get some oxalate into our meal, I only have 3 good grain options that I thought really worked easily because of where they came in by serving size. And that's the Ivory Teff Wrap from La Tortilla Factory. I've got 3/4 of a cup of quinoa boiled. That gives you a little bit higher. That gives you 60 milligrams. So you've got some play there. And then we've got spinach flavored brown rice spaghetti, which is using spinach in it. And so you can see there, a 1/2 cup dry is really 2 ounces, and then cooked 46 milligrams of oxalate. So that'll get you some oxalate on your plate. 3 different legumes where a 1/2 cup serving size are getting you between 40 and 50. So even before you've added any other ingredients to like a legume dish, these would be options that are getting you some oxalate. And then in the area of veggies, I did look at our purple sweet potato. I've got the orange baked sweet potato without skin. I've estimated it at 65 because different varieties come in at different oxalate levels. So that is something to know. And one of the reasons it's worthwhile to look at our spreadsheet. So if you wanted to be more specific about how much oxalate you're getting with your sweet potato, I would go back to there. 4 pieces of canned artichoke heart, 35 milligrams. Not quite getting you all the way to 50, but certainly can help if you're putting together a plate, and some nice variety. Green plantain, we tested it sauteed in oil, 40 milligrams. Organic French fries. If you like French fries, this might be a very happy thing to realize that you can have 100 grams of it. That's about 3.5 ounces. And that's 39 milligrams of oxalate. And a 1/2 cup of boiled okra is 65 milligrams of oxalate. So you can see some of them are a little over the 50, some of them are a little under, might be how you balance out your plate. Fruit, we've got blackberries coming in at 37 for 1/2 cup, 1/2 cup of guava, 46, about 120 grams of kiwi, and it depends on how it falls into your cup when you're measuring it. So it could be 3/4 to 1 cup of kiwi, 45 milligrams. And I've got, I believe, a 3/4 of a cup of pomegranate. Again, it's that 120 grams, and that'll get you about 42 milligrams as well. So you can see it's not always going to have to be one food that you have to rely on. And as well, you may be able to retain some of these as you go lower, but small servings. And in some cases, even if you can't eat the whole fruit because the whole fruit has too much oxalate, the juice can sometimes be your friend because it's much lower. So you don't have to give up the flavors necessarily as you go. Now, I really spent some time figuring out what kinds of snacks people could work with, because while I don't eat a lot of snacks, I do know that, today's lifestyles, you can be carrying food with you or going someplace where you need to be able to grab something on the go. So we did test Terra brand sweet potato chips. 1 ounce is 61 milligrams of oxalate. So that's pretty handy as something that you could either have in a portable lunch, which I have and will go through, or which you could carry as something for a snack. Ruffles brand natural potato chips. You could have 2 ounces. So that would be 2 of those little snack bags. And that would get you 48 milligrams of oxalate. So again, pretty good option. Cassava root chips. Another good one, very popular in the area where people are avoiding histamine. So this is kind of a nice thing to be able to take advantage of. And we also tested something called cassava strips, so have that included in our list. We have siete tortilla chips. Those are also cassava based. Plantain chips. So there are some things that you could use for higher oxalate, which are very portable. Not my favorite options, but I've got the high protein chocolate Ensure and the Boost rich chocolate nutrition drink. I suspect you could go to a keto version of these where they don't have as much sugar and it would be much better for you. Might be a little higher in oxalate depending on whether or not it's dark chocolate or not. And I actually talked through swapping out one of these, which at least will give you some additional protein and some vitamins and minerals, but I don't like the sugar content with these guys. Half a cup of pistachios is only 35 milligrams. Another great portable snack. Half a cup of walnuts, 37. And we tested something, and thank you to whatever member of the Trying Low Oxalates group decided to do this, because this is great for people who are reducing their oxalate intake. We tested a dark chocolate coconut prebiotic plus probiotic truth bar. And so I looked at the ingredients. They look pretty interesting. So for somebody who needs a higher oxalate snack, this would be a good one. So I used this kind of as a reference document as I was building my menus. Really, I'm thinking this is one of those things that you could use as some of your building blocks and, be able to get the oxalate that you need to be taking in as you're doing your slow reduction. Remember, this is not necessarily either for everybody. These are for people who are reducing their oxalate. So for our viewers who maybe already have reduced your oxalate, you're not necessarily going to be going back to pick up these foods unless you're going to use very small servings. And I'm going to let another person in. Okay, so just wanted to talk a little bit about these reference foods that I made use of, but now I'm going to go into kind of the 3 baseline meals. And I did a set of 3 baseline meals for breakfast, for lunch, and for supper. And then the idea being that we can play around with these a bit. Now I'll get this shared on the screen. Stop for a second, make sure I'm sharing my whole screen. There we go, that's better. Now you can see my reference document, but you can see now I've got this document that's got my 3 breakfasts on it. So again, my approach here, 500 milligrams, about 150 milligrams a meal, and then about 50 milligrams available for snacks. I've rounded the numbers here because I want to stress that it's not about doing this perfectly. It's really about doing it in a pattern where you're trending down and you're doing the slow reduction. We need more testing to really understand in more detail where oxalate's present, what differences there might be by variety of food. There's a lot of issues that still remain in our understanding of oxalate in our diet. So it's really very much more about how you slowly reduce as opposed to being able to do it perfectly. So I have tried to come in as close as possible to 150, but this will be give or take. And my first, oh, somebody back in again. Okay, so the first breakfast that I was tackling here is a breakfast millet dish that had fruit and seeds in it. There's a recipe for this, so I'll make sure that that's put up on the Trying Low Oxalates group, again, for people who are reducing their oxalate intake. This one might be very suitable for somebody who's still eating, you know, a more medium oxalate approach, because it's actually the baseline recipe here for this breakfast millet dish is 23 milligrams. So that's very doable. However, in order to get to that 150, what I've done here is add just 3/4 of an ounce of chopped almonds. This is really how oxalate rich almonds are. It's about 4 milligrams of oxalate per gram of almond. And so just 21 grams, and yes, you're going to need a gram scale to measure this, or 3/4 of an ounce, and chopped up is 84 milligrams of oxalate. And in order to make this a little bit fancy, and again, to add enough oxalate, I put 1 10-gram piece from a 90% cocoa Lindt bar, dark chocolate bar. So like you're going to chop it into little bits, you're going to sprinkle it over the top. But this would make 150 milligram breakfast. And you know, who says you can't enjoy your food while you're trying to reduce your oxalate? So this is something where the breakfast millet itself has got apricots and flax seeds, and you know, you're making this nice cooked cereal, and then you're adding these other things to it to get your oxalate. So over time, as you take out the additions here, you've got a baseline recipe that's pretty reasonable. And even that baseline recipe could be tweaked to bring it down. So this is the way you could continue to have a particular recipe that you're working with and enjoying, but slowly modifying it over time as you're reducing your oxalate. My second recipe is for cassava pancakes. I use the Otto's cassava flour, which is kind of well known again in the histamine world. Each one of these pancakes is, well, it's almost 30 milligrams of oxalate per pancake. So this is probably not something that's going to stay with you for a long time. But again, it is a recipe where you could reduce your serving size. This one has 3 pancakes with an egg, some raw carrot sticks, and some kiwi. So it's a big breakfast. It's a breakfast that'll definitely work for people with bigger appetites. But the whole idea here was, let's get some protein in and without having to impact our oxalate budget in this case. So an egg cooked either easy over or scrambled or however you prefer in a pan is basically going to be 0 oxalate. You're not going to add anything to this. So eggs are a great option once you're eating fully low oxalate, because you've got this part of the plate where you're not adding any oxalate, but you're adding food, calories, nutrition for the meal. So in this case, we might have to go to a different kind of pancake. So you could continue to eat this meal and change out the type of pancake that's using a lower oxalate flour. And then start to change out the fruit and the vegetable that are included. If this was eggs with bok choy sticks, for instance, and perhaps some sliced apple or sliced pears, and pancakes that were based on coconut flour or rice flour, this would be a fully low oxalate meal. So again, it's sort of getting your mind around what's going to provide your oxalate sources in a meal, and then how you want to handle the slow evolution of perhaps a meal that you really enjoy, but what things are going to change as you get lower and lower. The last one that I did, I actually found a great recipe for curried scrambled eggs. And I've suggested that we do this like a wrap and put it in an ivory Tef wrap. And the scrambled eggs themselves are 27 milligrams a serving, but this is a very hackable recipe where we could slowly bring the oxalate down by reducing the spices, but also using spice alternatives like curcumin extract instead of turmeric, swapping out things like holy lamb spice drops that we've tested instead of coriander seeds. So there's all kinds of ways that we can play with recipes over time. But with this, between the curried scrambled eggs, the Tef wrap, and a Tangelo, which is a big piece of fruit. So it's not a small one, but it's got a lot of oxalate in it. So it gets us to that 150 milligrams that we want while we're staying at this 500 milligram level and slowly reducing. So I wanted people to see how much variety you could really get, how much each meal doesn't have to be exactly like the one you had before. It doesn't have to look exactly the same, doesn't have to taste exactly the same. There's lots that can be done with a bit of exploration of what the spices will do for you. Spices are a great way to add oxalate, and they're also one of those things we need to manage as we get into lower oxalate. So this is one of those hidden oxalate additions, though. When you add things like turmeric to a recipe, it adds oxalate quickly. So that's why we have a recipe there for eggs, even though eggs alone are 0, that's going to give you 27 milligrams at that point. So those were the 3 basic breakfasts that I thought people could kind of rotate through, maybe sub in and out pieces that would have a similar amount of oxalate. So the meal where you're having the cassava pancakes with eggs, if you decided that you weren't really all that interested in having kiwi, we could go back to our document here and you could pick guava, for instance, or you could pick pomegranate, and you're going to come in within a few milligrams of the oxalate level that you're looking for here. So that's the other thing. If you're using these recipes for a couple of weeks at a time, you can kind of be working with them and not necessarily have to eat the same meal every day. Oh, no, I don't know how I'm going to move this. Oh, here we go. All right. So that was what I had for breakfast. For lunches, I took a very different approach. Here, I really wanted to have things that would be very portable, that would require minimal cooking, and where you could really have a stash of things in the fridge and sort of grab, put together, and go. So what I've done here is just plain ordinary Oscar Mayer oven roasted turkey breast, which we tested. And so I knew the oxalate level, with mayonnaise and lettuce in an ivory Tef wrap as a very simple wrap, 46 milligrams oxalate. So that's perfect. Then I've used a higher oxalate yellow pepper, but that'll give you a little bit of crunch and some vegetable sticks on the side if you like. I have a recipe here for a blueberry basil smoothie. It sounds really odd, but it's very tasty. And again, it's a recipe that we can play with in terms of the oxalate intake, but my baseline recipe for people who are reducing oxalate is this 24 milligrams a serving. And because of the blueberries, I add protein powder to it. I used almond milk in this version. And so you're getting kind of a combination of essential amino acids. So the idea here is some flavor, some taste, some variety again. And then 13 pieces, just 1 ounce of Trader Joe's organic banana chips turns out to be 61 milligrams of oxalate. I'm surprised how high that is, but I'm wondering if they're bananas on the green side or something, but for sure, an easy way for you to just be able to have something that's portable. Then for my second portable lunch, I went with an Udi's gluten-free plain bagel. Now, this is a gluten-free bagel, so again, I'm really sensitive to that gluten's not necessarily our friend, so I've tried to stay away from it. But what I did here was try to do a kind of fun thing. So 8 milk chocolate chips, cream cheese, and strawberry slices. So it's not a savory sandwich. It's a little on the sweet side. And actually 43 milligrams of oxalate between the plain bagel, the very carefully counted number of chocolate chips, because I was figuring out how much oxalate was in there, your cream cheese, and strawberry slices. So kind of something that might be, palatable even for fussy kids. With that, I've got a 1/2 cup of raw celery. We have got new data on organic raw celery, and it's a little bit higher than we knew it to be before. But I suspect this is also not just the stems, but maybe going right up into the leaves. And so this allows you to maybe use your whole celery stalk too. I've got the blueberry basil smoothie makes 2 servings. So I've kind of got your second serving with your second lunch here. And with this one, I've used the Terra sweet potato chips because they're another one, which is a good heavy hitter at 61 milligrams of oxalate for that little 1 ounce serving. But it, allows you to have this variety of taste and texture and even color. And so, a nice, easy, portable meal. And then for the last option here, what I've done is really, it's kind of charcuterie on the go. It's like cold meat and cheese. And because cold meats can have spices and things in them, I've estimated your meat and cheese at about 10 milligrams. So if you're like me, I come from a background where my mother's French Canadian, my father was Swiss. We ate lots of things like salami and summer sausage and stuff like that. I'm sure it's not very hard to use something like that to get to 10 milligrams. So I wouldn't say that's the only kind of cold meat you can do. Obviously, other kinds of cold meat that you can get at even at your regular grocery store. We've tested the oven roasted turkey. That was about 3 milligrams for 3 slices. So you're going to end up with at least some oxalate, even in a fairly uncomplicated, let's say, cold meat that you buy at the store. And there's a little bit in cheese. There's not a ton, but there's a bit. So with that, I've combined a 1/2 cup of walnuts. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to things like walnuts, I can just eat them quite freely. So a 1/2 cup doesn't seem like a big deal. I'm sure that would be very easily consumed for me in a little picky meal like this. I've again used the Terra sweet potato chips, and I have listed the Boost Rich Chocolate Nutrition Drink. So everything here is really portable. The problem is I'm not a fan of the Boost Rich Chocolate Drink. So I've suggested that you might be able to get about the same amount of oxalate. This is based on me looking at the ingredients. We haven't got testing, but again, this is not about being perfect. This is about coming in the right kind of range. So I'm saying sub a Bold House Farms protein dark chocolate drink, which I'm assuming is going to be 60 plus, and replace sweet potato chips with 1 ounce of regular potato chips. And that'll be more like 25 plus. So you're going to come in, I think, pretty comparable with a better substitution of ingredients. And if I add up what's there with the original Boost and the Terra sweet potato chips, coming in about 143. So I think that if you made the substitutions for the Bold House Farms and some potato chips, you would probably be fine. You would come in somewhere close to that. So the idea here was really as simple and portable as possible, but again, lots of nutrition built in. You don't want to just be eating high oxalate and not be getting the nutrition that you need. And last but not least, I have 3 basic suppers. And I've done 2 different things here. I've done one with a baseline recipe that you could continue to work with over time. And I've actually got 3 versions of this recipe. So I've got red and white turkey kidney bean chili. I've got red and white turkey mixed bean chili. And then my lowest version is red and white turkey chickpea chili. So this is one of those ways where you could stick with a dish that you understand and a recipe you're working with and just switch the legumes that are going into it to slowly step down the oxalate that's in it. This version with kidney beans is 45 milligrams a serving. I'm suggesting that you serve this with some siete tortilla chips because you can dip it in the chili and that's kind of fun. I've put a salad on the side, and this shows you just how low some salads can be. If you use a cup of romaine lettuce chopped with a dressing that uses, and this is one of my favorites, a tablespoon of oil, 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, and 1 teaspoon of maple syrup. Very nice, lightly sweet. And again, for people who are sometimes dealing with histamine issues, lemon juice is much better tolerated than a vinegar. And so this makes a nice little dressing. And it's only going to be 1 milligram of oxalate in that whole salad. So you can see how over time, if you're moving, it doesn't mean you're going to lose all the foods that you can eat, because sometimes you get some really great options that are really low oxalate. But in order to make sure that this meal had enough oxalate in it, because we're still got that 150 milligram target, I have a dessert of 3/4 of a cup of kiwi sliced. So total here, 145, right in the right sort of range. And, a completely different approach. This has got chili with crunchy tortilla chips, a salad, and some kiwi to eat. The next 2, the meat is 0. So this is the thing with animal products. We have foods here which have essentially no oxalate unless we added to it. So a basic pan-fried chicken breast using a tolerated fat or oil and salt. Essentially, that's 0 oxalate. I'm combining that with the tinkyata spinach brown rice spaghetti cooked. So 2 ounces dry, which is going to give you your serving once it's cooked, and served with a 1/4 cup of Hunt's tomato sauce and Parmesan on top. So meat, your pasta, and then I'm suggesting that with that, you could have 1/2 cup of mashed sweet potato. Gives you some different color on the plate, also gives you a nice hit of oxalate. And so that will get you to about 150. And again, the idea, you could over time stay with perhaps the spaghetti, switch out the vegetable, come to a little lower one, little lower one, little lower one, start to change the spaghetti. This meal could go with you all the way through to a low oxalate version. At our house, we would have a pan-fried chicken breast. We would use cornstarch bihon. It's like an angel hair pasta, but it's something we buy in an Asian store. It's 0 oxalate. Then we would use a butternut-based sauce on that and be able to have a salad where perhaps we're adding in some higher oxalate ingredients and a few nuts chopped over the top, because we have enough room in our oxalate budget then. But it's essentially the same meal. It's just going to change some of the constituents as you're getting to a lower and lower oxalate way of eating. And then the last meal that I put together, basic pan-fried steak, again with a tolerated fat or oil and salt, 0. But I rolled out boiled okra. This stuff is so cool. And it's not something I can eat anymore because it's really, really, really too high. But apparently if you make this with a little bit of lemon juice in the water, you can really retain some nice flavor and avoid sort of the mushy kind of slimy thing that can happen with okra. Anyway, I trust the recipe. I costed it out as to its oxalate. Got 70 milligrams there. I'm adding to that a little bit of a grain here. A half cup quinoa gives you 40 milligrams of oxalate. And then again, I threw in a nice salad here. We often have something as simple as romaine lettuce with an oil and apple cider vinegar and a bit of flake salt over it. So, you know, you can have a nice little bit of crunch that you're adding into this meal. And for dessert, half a cup of blackberries gives you a nice little hit of oxalate again, and you get a total of 147. So it's not as plug and play as I would have liked. I was desperately looking for things that would all come in really in a nice range around 50 milligrams. I was not as completely successful with that as I would have liked. But I'm hoping that this still gives you an idea about how you can slowly modify a meal and bring it towards the direction that you want to move in, and not necessarily be eating the same thing every day. Again, with these meals that I've got here, where I've got fruit as a dessert, you can swap out, you know, pomegranate for the blackberries. You can have guava instead of the kiwi. You can start to have a little bit of variety so that you're not necessarily sitting down and saying, okay, if it's Tuesday, it must be. You can have a little bit more fun with your food than that. And Karla, who's here with me, is another fellow foodie. So she understands that this whole wanting to keep it simple, but wanting to have some variety. So I'm going to let her jump in if she wants to add anything.
What I really love is that you can plug or play up and down. So with the quinoa, if you need to, with the pan fried steak and the quinoa, if you need to go up, that salad could be a spinach salad.
Oh, great point. Yeah.
Or, you know, spinach and chard. If you want to start working down, you could substitute the quinoa with millet or brown rice, or, you know, a brown rice, wild rice medley.
And those are actually kind of like stepping stones too. Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could take that baseline recipe and really the only thing that hasn't changed is the pan fried steak. And, you know, the same with, you know, with the chicken. You can plug or play up and down as much as you need to get you up to, you know, 750 milligrams a day, or down to 150, you know, 200 milligrams a day. And you don't have to do a whole lot. You know, your baseline recipe still kind of stays the same.
Yeah,
So
that's
I love that.
That's what I think is possible, particularly with that millet breakfast. Like, pull out the almond milk and sub in something the next step down. Maybe that's an oat milk or something, and then sub the next one down, and maybe that's a macadamia nut milk or something, because there's lots of stepping stones there.
Yep.
And
even with the grains, you can,
yeah,
you know, I used to make, for my son, it was, since he couldn't have oatmeal, you know, what do I give him that kind of works with that same concept? And it was a little bit of cooked white rice, tiny little bit of oatmeal. Sometimes it was soaked brown rice, and, you know, throw in some sunflower seed oil, you know, or sunflower seed butter, or now some macadamia nut butter. So you still, you know, you can still have kind of that comfort food, but you can, you know, you can play around with it.
Yeah.
So that works.
So if anybody here has any questions about what I've presented, I will be happy to share the recipes as we get them up onto the Trying Low Oxalates group, so that people have the bits and pieces that plug into this approach. But if anybody's got questions about reducing or what's good substitutions for things, because you've got Karla and I to yourselves right now. No questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Okay. Do you have any questions, Brenda, or sorry, Barbara, or are you okay too? Okay. Do we have anything else that we want to cover then, Karla?
I think we're good. I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thanks, both of you for being part of our small but mighty meeting. I'll have to go back to the 2 o'clock time period. Clearly this threw people a bit. And yeah, maybe maybe there's some other Canadians who are off celebrating Canadian Thanksgiving today. I'll be going to do that now myself. So in any case, thank you, everyone. As always, feel free to share the links once it's up on the group. You can subscribe to Wizards of Ox. We are putting up new videos every week, and all this material is provided as educational material. We want you to be able to make good decisions for yourselves, but please be sure to check with your doctor if you're making changes to your diet and you have medical conditions or other kinds of health issues that need to be dealt with. So this is educational for you folks, and hoping that you've enjoyed it. All right, I will stop the recording and we can open the floor. Thanks, everyone.